Good morning. Welcome to Westbridge Church. My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here. It is awesome to have you with us today on this beautiful daylight savings day. You guys all took advantage of that extra hour of sleep, man. Wow. I want to say hello to everybody joining us online. If you're in a parent viewing room, that's a great option if you have small kids you prefer to keep with you. And a couple of quick things before we jump into the talk today. One, tonight we have water baptism and worship night. If you enjoy the music, if you enjoy singing these prayers set to music, then I want to encourage you to come back tonight. We're going to do a ton of your favorites. So a whole bunch of, just a full hour of worship together here in this room. Come back. We're going to pack the place out and just sing our hearts out. It's going to be a blast. And in the midst of that, we're also going to do water baptism. If you're curious about water baptism, it is not a graduation ceremony to Jesus Juniorhood. It is not, you don't come up out of the water and like suddenly you close every business deal and get the house of your dreams and all your kids, suddenly just call you mother, father, how can we live life, your way. It doesn't work like that, but what it is it's a way to acknowledge and celebrate what God has done for us. And so the best language for it, it's not like lovely language, but it is really deep, rich language, is that it is a death, burial, and resurrection. So in the same way that Jesus died and was buried and then resurrected to new life and overcame death, it's the way that we celebrate that the old me, the Apostle Paul would use this language, the old me gets buried in a watery grave, and then the old me dies, and then I come to life as a brand new me, a new version of me. I'm born brand new. I'm given a new identity as a part of God's family. So water baptism is just a way to celebrate that, to acknowledge that and celebrate that. And so if you haven't been baptized in water, but you've said yes to following Jesus, this is a great next step for you, and we'd love to celebrate that together. The other question that often comes up is, well, I was baptized when I was a baby. My parents did that. And so does that cancel that out? Does that negate that? And I want to tell you emphatically, no, it doesn't cancel it. It doesn't negate it. But that's a decision your parents made. And for you to then go, now I've made the decision to follow Jesus and I want to celebrate that, is a way to really affirm that decision that was already made however many years ago. So really, really want to tell you, make it tonight. If that's the next step for you, go on the app, do it right now during service. You can still sign up or just show up tonight. Let us know. And it's better if you register, I should say. I'm going to get in trouble here. It's better if you register. So we know, because we want to give you a t-shirt. We want to really celebrate that with you. And so just go on the app, register real quick, and then we'll know how many people we're baptizing. We want to be prepared for everyone. But man, we would love to celebrate that with you. Okay, here's number 2 before we jump into the talk. As you can see, parking was a little rough this morning. And also, like we're pretty comfortable in here, right? We don't have our normal American 2-seat buffer, but that's okay. Like everybody's got a seat and we're figuring it out. But let me tell you where we're really packed. And this is every week we experience this. Parking and kids. Parking and kids, parking and kids. So you got a seat, you're pretty comfortable, right? We've got a pretty large, auditorium in here. We might have 40 kindergartners in a classroom today. We might have 50 second and third graders in a classroom today, And so here's what we know as we look to the future. We've got to expand. We've got to build onto this thing, and we just know that because more and more people are showing up. This is a great problem to have. This is an incredible opportunity for us. So next Sunday, we're launching a series that we don't leverage this very often. We're not the kind of church that's always like, don't miss next Sunday, it's gonna be historic, right? Every week is historic, and like every week you're trying to outdo that. It's like, no, every week's pretty normal, right? Just faithful week in, week out. I will say this, and we don't leverage this very often. Next Sunday will be a historic Sunday. I don't say that ever. You've probably never heard me say that, but it will be a series that will be something that we will look back on and go, that was something that really moved the needle, that projected us forward, the trajectory of our church, because we're gonna talk about what does it look like for us to expand this facility? What would it look like for this entire room that we're sitting in to be turned into space for kids and students? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? This is 8,000 square feet that we could turn into. What would it look like to take every 2 classrooms and turn them into 1 classroom? Every classroom double in size, make massive spaces in here. So I'm gonna tease you just a little bit. We're gonna show you next week, we're gonna show you floor plans, we're gonna show you renderings, all that kind of stuff. But today I'm just gonna tease you with this one picture. This is what we're gonna build. And the first part on the left is our current facility. The second part on the right is a addition where that's gonna double our space, double our parking. It's going to double our kids' spaces. Everything doubles. So that's it, take it down. You can't see it anymore? Nobody got a picture of it? You got to come back next week to see the rest, all right? All right, we are in week 5, our 5th and final week of a series called Culture Clash, and the goal with this series has been to really navigate this one question. How, as followers of Jesus, how do we live well and love well in a culture that seems to be moving further and further away from God? And how do we, as followers of Jesus, how do we continue to follow Jesus and at the same time not alienate people who are exploring faith in Jesus, or not alienate people who need Jesus? Need the hope that Jesus offers? How do we not alienate them in the process? And that can be sort of a fine needle to thread. This last week, I had the opportunity to go to Las Vegas for a conference with a bunch of other pastors from all over the country. I know exactly what you're thinking. Pastors Conference in Vegas. But believe it or not, there are actually churches in Las Vegas. However, that doesn't mean I didn't stop by a blackjack table while I was there. And just to see if I couldn't help get our building off to a good start, you know? And so me and a couple of buddies, we went to the blackjack table my last night there and just kind of hung out for a little bit, played a little bit of cards. And while we were playing, I was reminded of this one thing that isn't just true of cards, it's true in life. You don't get to choose the hand you're dealt. You can only choose how you play the hand you're dealt. You don't get to choose the cards you've been dealt. You don't get to choose the hand you're dealt. And the same thing is true in life. You don't get to determine the hand you're dealt. There are some things that are simply out of your control. What family you're born in, what country you're born in, some of our hardwired personality traits, what opportunities we have or haven't been given along the way. But every one of us is responsible to play the hand that we've been dealt. And as we've looked at the story of Daniel, Daniel and his friends were dealt a pretty bad deal. A pretty bad hand. Their nation was captured by the empire of Babylon. They're carried off by King Nebuchadnezzar, have to walk several hundred miles from Jerusalem to Babylon. As teenagers, they're forced into essentially, forced servitude in the king's court. And you don't read this isn't like described in Daniel, but it would have been, the cultural context would have been that these guys more than likely would have been castrated and turned into eunuchs, which would have been the custom for anybody who was captured and then forced into slave labor or essentially servitude. And so it's kind of a bad deal that these guys got. They got dealt a bad hand. And yet here's what we discover in the life of Daniel. Week 1, we looked at Daniel and his 3 friends. Their names were changed, their identities were changed, they're attempted to be essentially brainwashed into the ways and the culture of Babylon. But they just determined, these are the non-negotiables for us. So, okay, not okay. There's just certain lines we're not gonna cross. We're not gonna forget our identity, who God created us to be, and we're just gonna resolve that we're gonna follow God and we're gonna follow his ways. And here was what it's amazing that we found in week 1. They didn't shame the Babylonians for being Babylonians. They didn't shame the people from Babylon for being from Babylon. They just said, we're gonna follow our God, and you do what you gotta do, and we're gonna do what we need to do, and we will accept whatever consequences come as a result of that. And then the second week, we looked at this dream. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he couldn't remember it, but it disturbed him. And so he forced his advisors and his enchanters and all of his wise men, tell me what I dreamt. I can't remember it. Tell me what I dreamt and what it means. And of course, we can't do that. And so he wanted everyone killed. And what we're told is that Daniel handled this situation with wisdom and discretion. And as followers of Jesus, that's how we ought to handle things when we're dealing with anybody. He handled himself with wisdom and discretion. And we're reminded by the king's dream that there is only one kingdom that will last forever, and it's God's kingdom. That empires will come and go, and our allegiance is to an eternal kingdom. And then week 3, we learned about Daniel's 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they had a fire inside of them that was greater than the furnace in front of them. And they were not gonna just bow along to get along. They were willing to take a stand and withstand the heat. And their willingness to die for what they believed turned the heart of King Nebuchadnezzar a little bit more towards God. And then last week, our good friend John Alexander was here. He talked about 2 kings, Nebuchadnezzar in a season of his life, and his pride caused him to be driven out of the palace where he lived like a wild animal for years. And then he acknowledged that heaven rules, and there's no kingdom like God's kingdom. And when he acknowledged that, his kingdom was restored. But the second king was one of his grandsons, a guy named Belshazzar, and he knew the story of his grandfather's pride and all that had happened to him, but he decided to ignore it, and in his pride, his kingdom was lost. And that very night, King Belshazzar was killed. The empire of Babylon was conquered, and it was the end of the Babylonian empire, and instead it began the rise of the Persian empire, and the Persian empire expanded. And here's Daniel through all of it. Daniel continued to serve the king. He had served King Nebuchadnezzar. He had served King Belshazzar. He had served Cyrus, the first Persian king. And now we find ourselves, Daniel chapter 6, there is a new king of Persia. His name is Darius. And if you've ever seen those signs in a restaurant or a store or, a convenience store or a shopping mall or whatever, it just says, under new management. This is what Daniel has experienced over and over and over again. Under new management. He is now serving, at minimum, the fourth king. And Darius has made some incredible achievements in the Persian Empire. Darius divided the Persian Empire into 120 districts. It's a massive empire. It's the largest empire the world had seen at this point. And he separates it into 120 provinces or districts, each governed by a local magistrate. He creates a uniform currency across the empire. He builds roads. He standardized weights and measures. He unified this massive empire. And it's in this new Persian Empire that we find Daniel, and he's still playing the hand that he was dealt. And now he's not a teenager. Daniel has lived in Babylon now for nearly 70 years. He would be in his 80s at this point, and he continues to serve the king. And we're told in the first verses that there's 120 provinces. Each one of them has an official. And then there are 3 administrators that oversee those 120 officials. And Daniel is one of those 3 administrators. Here's what we discover in Daniel chapter 3. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, the question throughout this series has been how to honor God when you're living in a land that is not your own. When our allegiance is first and foremost to a kingdom that is not of this world, then how do we continue to live in this world and represent that kingdom? How do you honor God when you're living in a culture that seems to be moving further and further away from God? And Daniel is this incredible example of someone who has done this for a lifetime. And here he is, he's in his 80s, still going strong. And yet here's what I can tell you. Just because things are going well for him now in his 80s doesn't mean he isn't going to face adversity. In fact, it's towards the end of his life that Daniel actually faces his biggest season of adversity and his biggest challenge. And let's be honest, it's difficult enough to honor God when everything is going well, isn't it? It's difficult enough in the culture that we live in to just honor God when everything's going great. But when things are not going well, when you're in pain, when you're experiencing hardship or suffering or difficulty or adversity, it can be really difficult to honor God. What are you facing today? What is some adversity that you might be facing? Maybe like Daniel, you're facing office politics. We're going to get into that with him in a few minutes here. People talking about you to leadership and you don't have the chance to defend yourself. Like, how do you honor God if you find yourself in the midst of a toxic work environment? Or perhaps you're facing relational adversity. A friend or a loved one or a spouse, and something seemed to go off the rails relationally, and you just can't seem to figure out how to forgive, or you can't seem to figure out how to get on the same page, and it just seems like there's this tension that's underneath the surface, and you're trying to figure out how to address it, but things just seem off, and it seems that you're always in conflict. Or perhaps you're facing adversity when it comes to your health, and you just are in constant pain. It makes you tired and weary and cranky, and how do you honor God when you just don't feel like yourself? Perhaps you're facing adversity around financial pressures. Everyone keeps talking about the economy and inflation, and you're wondering, like, how can I honor God when I feel like I'm always stressed about money? Or if it could be one of the greatest opportunities to bring God honor is found in the difficult situation in which you find yourself. It could be that the hand you've been dealt is an opportunity to display God's faithfulness in the midst of adversity if you play your cards right. And so we're going to discover from Daniel's story some ways to be faithful in the midst of adversity. Here's what Daniel showed. Good work and good character. Good work and good character. See, in verse 3, we learn that the king was so impressed with Daniel that he was about to promote him and put him in charge of the entire empire. He's basically going to become the prime minister of the Persian Empire. But this idea wasn't so exciting to the people that Daniel was working with. They were a little jealous. Here's what we discover in the very next verse. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. They're like, we got to get at this guy. This doesn't seem fair to us. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Think about this. Good work and good character is honoring to God. The other administrators are jealous of Daniel, so they try to dig up some dirt on him, right? It's like, we got to find some skeletons in this guy's closet, something that, he carelessly said at a party 30 years ago, or let's look at his social media feed. Let's see if he ever tweeted anything offensive. Let's interview old classmates and college roommates, former employees, old flames, right? Let's find out if he ever used plastic straws or taken candy away from little kids. We got to figure out a way to cancel this guy. Sound familiar? Does that sound a little bit like the current cultural moment in which we find ourselves? Everybody digging up dirt on each other, doing their best to figure out how to bring them down. It's fun, isn't it? You have incredible potential wherever you're at to be a missionary in your field. You are strategically placed by God. You want to honor God in the midst of a culture, in the midst of this contentious cancel culture. You do good work with good character. Daniel just goes, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to display good character. You exhibit competence in your job and character in how you do your job. You have amazing potential to be a missionary where you're at. You're strategically placed by God in your school, in your office, in your shop, in your store, your cubicle, your break room, your conference room. And the way you honor God is by doing good work that reflects good character. Well, when these officials can't dig up anything on Daniel, then they decide to go a different route. Next verse says this: they concluded, our only chance of finding ground for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. All right, he's faithful and responsible and competent. We can't. He's handling everything well, so we can't go that way. So let's take another route. Let's do an end around, a loop around, and let's see if we can find a loophole with the way that he serves God. Because he won't back down on that, and if we can figure out a way to get him in trouble that way. If we can't attack his character, let's take his faith and use it against him. And when your character cannot be attacked, culture will go after your convictions. And that playbook is still alive and well today. Limit religious freedom, see how they respond. What's amazing is, these guys didn't even realize how much they were undermining their own nation by using that strategy. Religious liberty had been a blessing to their nation, and they didn't even realize it. While Daniel and his friends are serving in exile in Babylon, there's a prophet by the name of Jeremiah who wrote a letter to those who had been carried away. Now, just to give you a little context in history, there's different things going on. When you're reading the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, some of these things are taking place simultaneously. So you read the book of Daniel, and Daniel is in exile in Babylon, and then there's a prophet named Jeremiah who wrote Jeremiah and also a book called Lamentations. Lamentations, or just a bunch of lamenting, right? Growing up, I learned that Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet, and I learned that because my name's Jeremiah. My dad's a pastor, connect the dots. Lots of fun jokes for me as a kid. And and here's the deal. Jeremiah lived in Jerusalem, in the ruins of that city that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel and his friends were carried away. So when you read, like in the Hebrew scriptures, you've got Jeremiah and Lamentations. That's taking place in Jerusalem, while the book of Daniel is taking place in Daniel. And so Jeremiah writes a letter to the exiles that are living there in Babylon. And one of the things that he says to them is this. He says, work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you in exile. He's talking on God's behalf. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. Like he's saying, guys, you find yourselves in exile, but while you're there, pray for the prosperity of the city. Pray for the prosperity of the nation. Like do your best to serve the people that you're going to be there for a long time. And so it is in your best interest to ask God to show you favor and to show the nation that you're in favor, because it will help you. And these guys are trying to undermine Daniel. They didn't even realize how much their nation had been blessed because of Daniel's good work and good character. And now they're seeking to undermine the very thing that is bringing blessing to their nation. And so they go to the king. The administrators and high officers went to the king and said, long live King Darius. We are all in agreement. We administrators, which would have included Daniel, but he's not actually in on this. We administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of lions. Now, I think it's interesting that it says the den of lions and not a den of lions. It's like we just have one on hand. It's there, just in case you want to use that, Darius. And the king thinks that sounds like a pretty good idea. I think, all right, everybody's in agreement. We should all pray to me, and we're all in agreement. So he signs the decree into law. Now, one of the things that is historically, that you learn in history, is not part of the scriptures, but they include this, is according to the law of the Medes and Persians, when a king signed a decree into law, it could not be revoked for any reason. This was to keep kings who were maybe in an inebriated state from just signing laws and then going back on them. And so as a result of this, he cannot revoke this once it's written into law. Now, this is the second thing we learn from Daniel about how to honor God in the midst of adversity. Be faithful in the little things. Be faithful in the little things. Moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month. Listen to how Daniel responds to this new law that is put in place. There are all kinds of reasons for Daniel not to pray at this point. It's only 30 days. And Daniel, you got a high position here, and you can do so much good. You're going to become the prime minister of this whole empire. It does not serve anyone well for you to be thrown into a den of lions, right? So don't do anything that would cause you to lose that position. Or listen, if you still feel that you got to pray, just close the window. Like, do it in private. You don't have to pray with your eyes and your face, out the window. Like, come on, man. Nobody needs to know you're praying. Go home, close the door, pray to your God, and nobody will know that you're breaking this law. What does Daniel do? It says, when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual. This was what he had already been doing for nearly 70 years in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. Come on, man. We just covered this. Close the windows at least, right? He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Daniel could have just taken a 30-day break. I don't think God would have gone against him. At the very least, pray with the windows closed. But here's what Daniel does. He began to pray, facing Jerusalem with his window open, just as he had always done. And the reason he does this isn't because he's trying to take some kind of political stand or make some kind of political statement. He does it because the temple is in Jerusalem. So when you look into the history of why Daniel would do this nearly 13 generations earlier, the temple had been built by King Solomon. And when King Solomon built the temple, King Solomon prays a prayer of dedication for this brand new temple to God, 13 generations earlier. And he prays and he says, God, we're dedicating this temple to you, but let's be honest, there is no building that men can construct that can hold the living God. So this is just a monument that we can look to and that we can acknowledge your presence. And God, who are we? Like you are, there's no way that we could contain you in a building. And then he prays a really incredible prayer. 13 generations previous to Daniel, he's looking into the future and he prays a prayer for the future Israelites. And he includes people that may face their enemies and lose and be carried off in exile, though he doesn't know Daniel by name. Here's the dedication prayer of Solomon. If your people are defeated by their enemies, he's praying to God, dedicating this temple. He says, if they are defeated by their enemies because they've sinned against you, and if they turn to you and acknowledge your name and pray to you here in this temple, if they turn towards you, wherever they've been carried off, if they will turn towards this temple as a symbol of your presence and acknowledge you, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel and return them to this land that you gave their ancestors. And so Daniel knows this prayer. He would have been taught this prayer of dedication of the temple, and he knows if this ever happens to us, we are to open our windows and we are to turn towards the temple in Jerusalem and acknowledge the living God, and we're to pray to him. And every day he's done this for nearly 70 years, and he is not about to stop now. And Daniel was able to stand firm and make the right decision at 80 because he had been faithful in the little things when he was 18. The person we are becoming tomorrow is being shaped by the decisions that we're making today. Crisis doesn't create who you are. It reveals who you are. And pressure pushes what is on the inside to the outside. So what character decisions are you making today that will be revealed when the pressure is on? Are you developing habits that help you to become more like Jesus? How you spend your time, what you look at, what you think about, what you talk about, what you worry about, what you spend your resources on. It's almost like a search engine. Like when you go to a search engine and you start to type something into that search engine, and as you're typing it, it starts to autofill what it thinks you're gonna search. So like I go and I start to type in back to school clothes, and what comes up is Backstreet Boys. And it's like, okay, it's like an algorithm, right? Like based off my previous search patterns. And I would say, nobody else, just me? Okay. I would say the same thing is true when it comes to how you and I respond to adversity and criticism and challenges and pain. Your heart autofills your response based on the patterns that you've been establishing every day. And Daniel just didn't suddenly show up one day and just muster the courage and confidence in that moment. This was the result of decades of faithfulness. This was the result of going and praying out that window 3 times a day for the last nearly 70 years. He didn't just muster that up in that moment. He had developed spiritual rhythms in his life that gave him the courage and conviction to stand when the pressure was on. I don't know about you, but often for me, when I think about spiritual disciplines or spiritual practices or spiritual habits, I feel like I don't do them often enough and I don't do them good enough. That's just me. Like some basic spiritual practices that help you become more like Jesus are a few of these. What we're doing right now, gathering together. We gather together and we remember our faith is a faith that is communal. It is not private and just between me and God, but I exist as a part of something bigger than myself. And so we gather together. And you know what? I bring all of my rough edges, and you bring all of your rough edges. And I bring all of my past, and you bring all of your past. And I bring all my baggage, and you bring all your baggage, and we lump it all together here in this room. It's great. Because what we're doing is we're going, look, the rough edges that I bring and the rough edges that you bring, we're actually sharpening each other. And now I've got to learn to love like Jesus, and you've got to learn to love like Jesus, and I have to see you the way Jesus sees you, and you have to see me the way Jesus sees me. And it forces us to rub shoulders and to connect and sometimes to tolerate. But in that, there is this shaping where we become more like Jesus. This is just a simple spiritual practice that helps us to become more like Jesus. This is why gathering together is so important. Another one would be serving, that I regularly take time to serve others, that I do something that isn't just about me, that I do something that isn't even about me getting a return, but that it's about emptying myself of the things that God has given me. That's one way that I become more like Jesus. It's a spiritual rhythm or a practice. Giving of my resources, recognizing, God, it all belongs to you, and you've entrusted it to me, and so I want to manage that well, and I want to return a percentage back to you because I want my dependence to be on you, and I want to see your kingdom move forward in the world. It's just a practice that helps me become more like Jesus, spending time in prayer, reading the Bible, learning more about Jesus, helping him, spending time allowing him to shape my heart. Now, I sort of grew up thinking that if I was going to do these practices, I would have to do them often enough and good enough, right? Like, okay, if I miss a day, God's going to be mad at me. And if I am going to pray, it's got to be at least 30 minutes, right? I got to fill the quota. I got to read a certain amount of chapters every day. I got to fill the quota, got to check the box. And this is like me re-upping my salvation dues at a membership club. It's like, this is not you re-upping your salvation membership, because here's what I can tell you. Jesus already paid it all in full. When Jesus died and rose again, he overcame sin and death once and for all, and he declared you to be righteous in God's sight. That when God looks at you, you are in right standing with God, not because of anything you can do, but because of what Jesus has already done. Free and clear. Your debt is paid in full. These practices aren't about salvation. They're about you developing character so that you can withstand life when the pressure is on. Faithful in the little things, day in and day out, and you will develop the character you need when the pressure is on. You know why Steph Curry is so good at basketball? It's not just pure, raw, natural talent. It's because of his practice routine. Every single day, he does the exact same routine, and it's intricate, and it's all based on the fundamentals. He goes back to the basics. He's got basic hand drills, basic dribbling drills, basic shooting drills, and he does them again and again and again and again and again. So that when the game is happening, when the pressure is on, in the clutch moments, it's just second nature. He doesn't have to think about it because he's put in the time, he's put in the practice. That's what this is all about. Simple habits, faithful in the little things, so that I know I can stand with character and conviction when the pressure is on. Here's the third thing we learn. Determine whose kingdom you belong to. Daniel had already determined. And what's really amazing, Daniel prays 3 times a day. And we're just told this, like he went to his window, he looked toward Jerusalem, and he prayed. Well, what did he pray? Do you ever wonder that? And here's what's amazing. In Daniel chapter 9, when you fast forward a few chapters, it actually gives us the prayer that Daniel prayed when he's sitting at that window. And it gives us incredible insight into what Daniel is thinking, and what he prays for might surprise you. Listen to the words of Daniel's prayer. He says this, "Our God, lean down and listen to me. Open your eyes and see our despair. See how your city He's talking about the city of Jerusalem that had been conquered and destroyed. He says, see how your city, the city that bears your name, lies in ruins. We make this plea, not because we deserve help, but because of your mercy. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and act for your own sake. Do not delay. Oh my God, for your people and your city bear your name. Daniel is praying because he wants God's honor to be upheld. He's going, God, for your sake and for your name. He's praying that God's honor would be restored. He's going, God, if the city and if the temple are rebuilt, your honor would be restored. The surrounding nations wouldn't look to Israel and mock. They would look at you as the true God. And God, I want honor to be restored to your name. That's what Daniel's passionate about. And in this moment, he's choosing God's honor over his own position, over his own status, and at this point, even over his own safety. And the question is, whose honor are we going to live for? Are we going to live for God's honor or live for our own honor? And those kind of whose honor type of decisions are sometimes really big, life-altering, fork-in-the-road type of situations like Daniel is facing. But more often than not, they are small character decisions that happen on a day-to-day basis. Every day we're faced with small, seemingly insignificant choices between our honor and God's honor. And how we respond to those day-to-day, who am I going to honor decisions will make a huge difference in our lives. Daniel had served Babylon well, but he served Babylon second. He had decided deep down whose kingdom would get his allegiance and whose honor he would pursue. And he wasn't looking at this magnificent kingdom of Babylon, this magnificent kingdom and empire that had been built. He was looking back to the kingdom that had been destroyed, but that represented the presence of God. And Daniel's saying, I've never hid the fact my first allegiance is to God and his kingdom. You do what you have to do, and I'm going to be who I've always been. And so the trap is set. The administrators and officials and tattletales went to the king. They tell on Daniel, and they say, he's broken the law. He's got to be thrown in the lion's den. And because the law could not be revoked, even though Darius had affection for Daniel, he didn't want to see it happen, he had to follow through. And so, at last, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. And the king said to him, may your God, who you serve so faithfully, rescue you. Daniel was arrested. He's thrown into the den of lions. A stone is placed over the mouth of the cave and sealed with the king's seal. And the king stayed awake all night. He's worried about Daniel. He had affection for Daniel. He couldn't eat. He declined any entertainment. And when the morning finally came, King Darius rushed back to the cave, to the den of lions to check on Daniel. And I think this is so fascinating. Daniel is resting better in the den of lions than the king is in the palace. And here's what happens. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lions? One of the things I love about this exchange is that Darius doesn't follow God as far as we know. He's a pagan king, but he's so impressed with the way that Daniel does follow God, that he has so much respect for Daniel. I hope this is what is said of us here at Westbridge Church. I don't follow your God, but it's so clear from your life that you serve him so faithfully. My goal is that we create environments here together that when people walk through our doors exploring faith in Jesus, that they would encounter those of us who follow Jesus and they would say, man, I'm not sure about your Jesus, but you represent him really well by the way that you serve him and the way that you follow him. It makes me want to believe in your Jesus, even though I don't think I'm there yet. That would be my prayer. And I just think the way that we get there, the way that we do that is we choose God's honor over our own. God, what can we do to point people to you? And here's the fourth thing we learned from Daniel. Do not dishonor others in the process. King Darius is at his worst, maybe a malicious and egocentric murderous dictator. At his best, he is an unwise king who is tricked by his officials. However you want to look at it, it lands Daniel in a dangerous situation because of his faithfulness. And there are going to be things that we will face as followers of Jesus, either because of malice, malicious intent, or just pure ignorance. And we must decide how we will respond. We don't get to determine the hand we're dealt, but we do decide how we play the hand we're dealt. Here's how Daniel decided to play the hand he was dealt. Daniel answered, long live the king. That's a sign of honor towards the king. This is how the first guys, when they came and tried to trick the king, they said, long live the king. This is a way of acknowledging his authority. And so Daniel starts off by saying, long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. What an interesting thing to say. I find this to be such an astonishing response. Darius is the whole reason Daniel is in this situation to begin with, and yet his first response is, long live the king. And then he says, I just want Darius, I want you to know, I haven't wronged you. I don't hold any ill will towards you. I'm still gonna serve you and remain faithful to you. Can you imagine the emotions that Darius must have experienced? Not just to realize his most trusted administrator was rescued, but that his loyalty to the king remains unwavering. That's because Daniel had determined long ago who he was gonna be. I'm gonna follow God. I'm gonna live the way God wants me to live. I'm not gonna shame people in Babylon for being from Babylon. And I'm not gonna dishonor anybody. He knew how he would play his hand regardless of the hand he got dealt. And you and I live in a cancel culture. That's literally the phrase that is used for our culture today in the 21st century. A cancel culture, which means this: if you hurt me, I will cancel you. I will block you on all my social media, canceled. You said something wrong about me, we work together, canceled. And here's what's so crazy about cancel culture. You don't just have to hurt me. Like, if I even perceive that you said something about somebody else that I don't even know, and they might potentially be hurt, even though I don't have all the details, canceled. That's cancel culture. It's crazy, right? As followers of Jesus, what if we just determined, like Daniel, no matter what happens in our culture, we will not dishonor others. We will not participate in cancel culture, even if we disagree with them. As followers of Jesus, what if we just determined we're gonna see people the way that Jesus sees people? What if we just determined to live faithfully and love generously, even in the midst of adversity, even in the midst of a cancel culture? What would that do to point other people towards God? The king was overjoyed and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Darius issues a new decree at this point that everyone should serve the God of Daniel. He's like, this is the God who rescues people from lions' dens. Maybe we should all serve that God. And it's amazing because this chapter begins with this king prohibiting prayer to anyone other than him, and then it ends with a decree saying everyone should pray to God. This is the difference that followers of Jesus can make in a culture when we follow God and live our lives reflecting him without dishonoring others in the process. Now, here's what's amazing about this story. This is an incredible story. It's a great story. It's not a great story because Daniel got out of the lion's den. It's a great story because he got into the lion's den. That's what makes this story worth telling. What makes this story worth telling isn't the rescue, but Daniel's faithfulness to God in the midst of adversity. It's not that he got out of it, but that he was willing to get into it that makes all the difference. And fast forward to another empire, the Roman Empire. Fast forward to another follower of Jesus living in a culture that's moving further and further away from God and still making a difference. This guy is called the Apostle Paul. And fast forward to another king that puts him in a dangerous situation. This time it was the Roman emperor, and this time Paul would not escape with safety or with his life. And he's on trial, and he's knowing that he's probably gonna be executed for his faith. And he writes a letter to a young friend, a pastor named Timothy, who's living in Ephesus. And it's almost as if he remembers the courage and the character of Daniel. He's read the stories. He grew up in a Jewish household. He's heard the stories of Daniel. He's heard about his courage and his conviction. He knows the exploits. And now he himself is facing a very similar situation. Standing in front of a king, being told, deny Jesus and we will let you live. Now, if you continue to talk about Jesus and be faithful to Jesus, you're gonna be executed. And so Paul has a decision to make. And he writes something to Timothy. It would be the last thing that he writes before his execution. Look at this. The Lord stood with me and gave me strength so that I might preach the good news in its entirety for all the Gentiles to hear. He's like, I'm before the king. I'm before everyone gets to hear the good news. I get to preach it in all of its entirety. And he rescued me from the lion's mouth. What an interesting thing for Paul to say. It's like the story of Daniel is somewhere in the back of his mind, and he says, he rescued me from the lion's mouth. Yes, and the Lord will deliver me from every evil attack and will bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. All glory to God forever and ever. Amen. Paul goes, even if they take my life, I'm a part of something that is eternal. And Paul knows his time on earth is short, but he's willing to face whatever happens in this life because he's looking with anticipation to God's heavenly kingdom. That is the hope that is promised to everyone who puts their trust in Jesus. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what adversity you're facing or what you're carrying, what pain you're carrying, what hardship you're facing. And whatever it is, I wish you weren't going through it. But could I remind you, and could I encourage you, that this season right here could be an incredible opportunity to honor God. That you don't get to choose the hand you're dealt, but you can determine how you play it. And God might be able to grow something in you in that process. That God might use your experiences to encourage and bless others precisely because of what you're going through. And so Daniel is a story. This whole book of Daniel, it's a story about God's honor. God's people are in exile in a foreign land. And it's the story of how they chose to honor God in a culture that is very much against their faith. And it's the story of how God repeatedly and creatively and powerfully shows up and makes himself known and encourages and sustains his people, bringing honor to himself. In the first centuries of the Roman Empire, when followers of Jesus were being persecuted by the Roman Empire, they would hide under the city of Rome in what were called the catacombs. And on the walls, they would inscribe, or sometimes on their gravestone, they would have inscribed a picture of Daniel in the lion's den. And the reason they did that is because it was a story for them that was closely associated with Jesus. Like Daniel, men conspired against Jesus. Like Daniel, traps were set for Jesus. Like Daniel, Jesus was falsely accused by his enemies. Like Daniel, Jesus was brought before a ruler who had the power to set him free, had affection for him, but ultimately couldn't revoke the law. Like Daniel, Jesus was condemned to a violent death. Like Daniel, he was put in a cave and sealed with a large stone. And like Daniel, Jesus walked out of that cave fully alive. And folks, that's still the God we serve today. Jesus overcame sin and death for you and me, and he invites us to follow him and remain faithful to him because he is preparing an everlasting kingdom in which death has no power. And that's why we have such confidence and hope, because we look to a kingdom that is not of this world, even as we live in this world. And when Jesus overcame sin and death, that means he has the power to overcome the things that are bringing death to you and me. And he simply asks us to follow him, to put our trust in him. And when we do that, we can be a part of his kingdom, part of his family forever and ever. You're invited to that. And it's not something you behave your way into or earn your way into. It's something that Jesus has already done. He's already paid the price. The price of admission is already paid. You've been invited to be a part of it. If you've never said yes to that, I want to invite you to say yes, whether you're watching online here in the room, by just agreeing with this prayer. And then after we pray, we're going to celebrate communion. God, please forgive my sins. Forgive me for the times that I've walked away from you. I'm so grateful you never walk away from me. So God, I pray yes to your invitation. Make me your son, make me your daughter, and help me to put my trust in you and to follow you as best as I know how from this moment on. I want you to be the leader of my life. And God, I pray for every one of us as we experience hardship and adversity and sometimes difficulty and pain in this life, that like Daniel, we would be faithful in the little things, day in and day out, that you would give us the strength and the courage and the conviction to stand and honor you when the pressure is on. We would do it in a way that doesn't dishonor others, but God, that points them to your grace. We pray this in your name, amen. Hey, if you prayed that prayer, I would just love to know. You can just go on the connection card on the Westbridge Church app or the connection card you have, check that box. That just lets us know you prayed. I'd love to follow up, answer any questions that you might have. Now, on your way in today, you should have received one of our communion packs. I think this was designed by NASA. We want you to know that you don't have to be a member here, and if you did not get one, raise your hand. We have ushers that will get one into your hands. You don't have to be a member here at Westbridge. This is open communion, but if you're a follower of Jesus, there is rich meaning to this. If you're just exploring faith, you may just want to observe. But if you're a follower of Jesus, I'd encourage you to participate in this. And here's what this is. It's a way for us to remember the sacrificial love of Jesus and how he paid the price for you and me. So on the night Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it and he gave it to his disciples. And he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And every time that we receive this, we remember that sacrifice. And so today, as we pause and we reflect on the sacrificial love of Jesus through his broken body, let's receive the bread together. In the same way he took the cup, he said, "This is my blood which will be poured out for you." And it's the new covenant between God and humanity. It's not a conditional, if you keep your end of the bargain, I'll keep my end of the bargain. No, God said, I'm paying the price in full, and you're invited in. And so together, as we remember the sacrificial love of Jesus through his spilled blood, let's receive the cup together. Let's pray. God, thank you for sending Jesus into this world. Thank you that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, we have right standing with you. And now, God, may we live lives that reflect that new identity. May our lives point others to you. We pray this in your name. Amen.